He had stepped into something far more dangerous, something that had been hidden in the heart of this burning house, waiting. And it was in the room with them. Miles's hand went to his sidearm, but he knew it would be useless against whatever this presence was. The boy's eyes flickered past Miles, towards a shadowed corner of the room. His lower lip trembled. He's angry. Who's angry, son? Miles asked, his voice low and steady, trying not to spook the child or whatever else was in the room. A low growl answered him. It wasn't a human sound. It was deep, guttural, filled with malice. It seemed to come from the shadows themselves. Miles slowly turned, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The light caught a flicker of movement, something large and indistinct, melting back into the darkness. The air grew even colder, and the sweet, metallic scent intensified, making him feel lightheaded. It wants the book, the boy whispered, his voice barely audible. It wants the symbols. The book. Jacob's words echoed in Miles's mind. It's in the book. The answer to stop it. He looked back at the open door to the ritual chamber, the glowing symbols a stark contrast to the shadows in the room. He had the book in his hand. Was that why this thing was here? Because he had disturbed it? Because he had the key to its power or its weakness? He heard a crash from upstairs, a section of the house giving way. The fire was still raging, a constant reminder of the precious little time he had. He had to get the boy out, and he had to figure out what was in the book. Okay, son, Miles said, forcing a reassuring tone. We need to go. Can you walk? The boy nodded, slowly sitting up in the bed. As he did, Miles saw something else. A faint, dark stain on the sheets beneath him. It looked like blood. A fresh wave of dread washed over him. The growl came again, closer this time. The shadows in the corner seemed to deepen, to writhe. It's getting closer, the boy whimpered, his eyes wide with terror. Miles knew he couldn't just grab the boy and run. Not with this thing in the room. He needed a distraction. He looked down at the book in his hands. The symbols on the open page were still glowing. He didn't understand them, but maybe they were a language this thing understood. A language of power. He held the book out slightly, towards the shadowed corner. You want this? He said, his voice firm, projecting a confidence he didn't feel. You want the symbols? The growling intensified, a sound of anticipation, of hunger. The shadows in the corner pulsed, growing larger, more defined. Miles could almost make out a shape within them, something with sharp angles and unnatural movements. The bold text was a command, a resonating force that vibrated in his chest. It wasn't just in his mind anymore. It was in the air, in the very stone of the room. Miles took a deep breath. He had a choice. Give the book to this entity, potentially unleashing something even worse, or risk everything to keep it from it, to try and understand its secrets himself. He looked at the boy, his small face etched with fear. He couldn't risk the child. He tossed the book, not at the shadowed corner, but towards the open doorway of the ritual chamber. It landed with a soft thud on the stone floor, the glowing symbols on its pages a beacon in the darkness. The growl turned into a shriek of frustration, of rage. The shadows in the corner recoiled for a moment, then surged towards the book. Now, Miles yelled, grabbing the boy's hand. We go. He pulled the boy from the bed and sprinted towards the open door, the chilling scent of the entity and the terrifying shrieks of its anger echoing behind them. They burst back into the ritual chamber, the glowing symbols on the walls a sudden comfort after the oppressive darkness of the bedroom. He didn't stop. He dragged the boy through the narrow corridor, the symbols on the walls pulsing frantically now. He could hear the entity thrashing in the chamber behind them, its rage palpable. They reached the basement, the heat and smoke from the fire above a stark contrast to the chilling cold they had just escaped. He could still hear the entity, a furious roar echoing from the ritual chamber, but it wasn't following them. The symbols in the corridor seemed to be holding it back, or perhaps the entity was more interested in the book. He didn't waste time. He pulled the boy towards the basement window he had entered through. The flames above were still raging, but they hadn't spread down here. Not yet. He pushed the boy out first, helping him scramble through the narrow opening. Then he followed, collapsing onto the grass outside, gasping for air, the smoke burning his lungs. He looked back at the burning house. The flames seemed to intensify around the area where the ritual chamber was located. He could still hear faint, unnatural sounds coming from within. He had saved the boy, but he had left the book, and the entity was still in there. And he still had no idea what any of it meant, or what he had just unleashed upon this quiet suburban street. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling. He had faced fire. He had faced a desperate man, but he had never faced anything like what was in that house. And he had a feeling it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He had a feeling it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The sirens were closer now, the wail growing louder with each passing second. He stood there on the lawn, the boy shivering beside him, both of them watching the house burn, a silent witness to the unnatural events that had unfolded within its walls. Miles's mind raced. How could he explain this? A burning house, a rescued child, and a hidden ritual chamber with glowing symbols and a malevolent entity? He was an FBI agent, trained to deal with the tangible, with criminals and evidence. This was something else entirely. He looked at the boy. The child was still in shock, his eyes wide and distant. Miles needed to get him somewhere safe, away from this nightmare. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the swirling smoke near the edge of the property. A man in a white shirt, his face grim, was walking towards them. Miles recognized him instantly. He had seen him earlier, watching from across the street. The man who had been observing Jacob. Miles tensed, his hand instinctively going to where his sidearm should have been. He had left it in the house. A cold wave of vulnerability washed over him. The man in the white shirt stopped a few feet away, his gaze fixed on Miles. There was no expression on his face, just a chilling stillness. "You shouldn't have interfered," the man said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. Miles felt a prickle of fear. This man knew. He knew about the house, about the ritual chamber, about the entity. "Who are you?" Miles demanded, stepping slightly in front of the boy. The man didn't answer directly. He just looked at the burning house. Some things are best left undisturbed. What was in there? Miles pressed, his voice urgent. What was that thing? The man's eyes shifted to Miles, and for a fleeting moment, Miles saw a flicker of something in them. Not fear, but recognition? As if he knew Miles from somewhere. "It is ancient," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And it is bound to the symbols." "The book?" Miles asked, his mind clicking into place. Jacob had the book. He was trying to stop it. The man gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. He was trying, but he was not strong enough. Miles looked back at the burning house. The flames seemed to be dying down now, the structure beginning to collapse in on itself. Had the entity been consumed by the fire? Or had it escaped? The man in the white shirt seemed to sense his question. "Fire cannot destroy it," he said, his voice chillingly calm. "It is not of this world." Miles's blood ran cold. Not of this world. What in God's name had he just encountered? "Then how do you stop it?" Miles asked, his voice hoarse. The man's gaze drifted back to the spot where Miles had emerged from the basement window. "The book," he said again. "The symbols hold the key, both to its power and its containment." "I left it in there," Miles said, a knot forming in his stomach. "I had to get the boy out." A flicker of something disapproval crossed the man's face. A costly decision. The sirens were right outside the street now, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the smoke. Emergency vehicles were pulling up, firefighters were scrambling out, hoses were being unrolled. "We need to go," Miles said, taking the boy's hand again. He couldn't stay here, not with the authorities arriving. He had too many questions, too many things that couldn't be explained. The man in the white shirt didn't try to stop him. He just watched them, his expression unreadable. Miles pulled the boy away from the house, blending into the growing crowd of onlookers and emergency personnel. He kept the boy close, shielding him from the chaotic scene. He needed to find a way to disappear, to process what had happened, to figure out what to do next. He glanced back at the man in the white shirt. He was still standing there, watching the burning house, a solitary figure in the smoke. As Miles watched, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the neighboring houses. Miles knew he couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. He had stumbled into something far bigger than a simple house fire, something that involved ancient symbols, a powerful entity, and a mysterious man who seemed to know more than he was letting on. He had the boy to protect, and he had to find out what was in that book. The key to stopping whatever was in that house. Or maybe the key to unleashing it. The chilling thought sent a shiver down his spine. He had to find that book. He had to understand. And he had a feeling that the man in the white shirt would be involved. Miles and the boy walked away from the burning house, the sirens fading behind them. The boy, still silent and clinging to Miles's side, felt small and fragile. Miles knew he couldn't just abandon him. They found a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. The fluorescent lights felt harsh after the darkness and smoke of the house. Miles ordered coffee, black and strong, and a hot chocolate for the boy. The mundane act of ordering felt surreal after the terror they had just escaped. As they waited for their drinks, Miles looked at the boy. His name, he remembered, was David. "David," Miles said gently. "Are you okay?" David didn't answer, just stared down at the checkered pattern of the tabletop. "What happened in that house, David?" Miles asked, his voice low. Before I got there?" David flinched at the question. His small hands clenched into fists. "He was working," David whispered, his voice hoarse. "In the room with the pictures. The ritual chamber." Miles nodded. "What was he working on?" "He was trying to make it stop," David said, his voice barely audible. "The bad dreams. The cold. The bad dreams. The cold." Miles remembered the sudden drop in temperature in the house, the oppressive chill that had settled over him. Was the entity causing this? "Did you see anything else?" Miles asked, hesitant to push too hard. "Anything strange?" David finally looked up, his eyes wide and filled with a childlike terror that made Miles's stomach clench. "The shadows," he whispered. "They moved. And they talked to him." The shadows. Miles remembered the shifting, writhing darkness in the bedroom. They talked to Jacob? Was that how the entity communicated? Their drinks arrived, a welcome distraction. Miles took a long sip of his coffee, the heat a comfort against the lingering chill in his bones. "Did your father have a book, David?" Miles asked, trying a different approach. "A book with strange pictures in it." David nodded. "He kept it in the room. He said it was important." Miles felt a jolt of urgency. The book. It was still in the house, or what was left of it. He had to get it. But how? The house was probably a crime scene now, crawling with first responders and likely other FBI agents. He needed a plan. He needed information. And he had a feeling the man in the white shirt might be the key to both. But where would he find him? As if summoned by his thoughts, the door to the diner opened, and the man in the white shirt walked in. He scanned the room, his gaze settling on Miles and David. He didn't approach them directly, but sat at a booth across the diner, ordering a cup of coffee, his eyes never leaving them. Miles felt a surge of adrenaline. This was his chance. He needed to talk to him. He waited until the man had his coffee, then stood up. "Stay here, David," he said softly. "I'll be right back." David nodded, his eyes still fixed on the man in the white shirt. Miles walked across the diner, his movements deliberate. He sat down in the booth opposite the man. The man's face was impassive, but Miles could sense a tension in him, a coiled readiness. "We need to talk," Miles said, his voice low. The man took a slow sip of his coffee. "I told you," he said, his voice still that same low, emotionless tone. "You shouldn't have interfered." "Interfered with what?" Miles asked. "With Jacob trying to stop whatever that thing is?" The man's gaze was steady. He was trying to contain it, not stop it. It cannot be stopped. Only contained. Miles felt a chill. Contained. Not destroyed. "And the book." "The book holds the sigils," the man said. "The keys to its binding." I left in the house, Miles admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The man's lips twitched, a hint of something that might have been disapproval. A mistake. I had to get the boy out, Miles defended. The boy is sensitive, the man said, his gaze flicking towards David. He can perceive things others cannot. Miles thought about David's words, about the shadows that moved and talked. Is that why the entity was focused on him? Perhaps, the man said, his answer frustratingly vague. Or perhaps it was drawn to his proximity to the binding. Binding? So the house was some kind of prison? And the symbols in the ritual chamber were the bars? Who are you? Miles asked again, more insistent this time. The man finally met his gaze, and Miles saw a flicker of something in his eyes again, something old and weary. Someone who understands what is at stake. What is at stake? More than you can imagine, Agent, the man said, the use of Miles's title a subtle confirmation that he knew exactly who Miles was. That entity, it is not the only one. And the balance is fragile. Miles felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. Not the only one. Balance. This was bigger than he had ever imagined. The book, Miles said, bringing the conversation back to the tangible. I need to get it back. It's the only way to understand. The man's gaze was assessing. The house will be swarming. You will not be able to simply walk in. I know, Miles said, but I have to try. The man was silent for a moment, considering. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, worn leather-bound notebook. He slid it across the table towards Miles. This may help, the man said. It contains some interpretations of the sigils. And some warnings. Miles picked up the notebook. It felt old, the leather soft and worn. He opened it to a random page. It was filled with intricate drawings of symbols, similar to the ones in the ritual chamber, and beside them, cramped, handwritten notes in a language Miles didn't recognize. What is this? Miles asked, looking up at the man. A guide, the man said. Use it wisely. And be careful, Agent. You have stepped onto a path you may not be able to leave. Miles looked down at the notebook in his hands. A path he may not be able to leave. He had a feeling the man was right. He had gone from a routine missing person case to the edge of something ancient and terrifying. And he had a feeling this was just the beginning. He looked up, but the man in the white shirt was gone. He had disappeared as silently and mysteriously as he had arrived. Miles was alone, with a terrified boy, a burning house, and a notebook filled with ancient secrets. And he had to find that book. Before someone else did. Or before whatever was in that house found a way out. And he had to find that book. Before someone else did. Or before whatever was in that house found a way out. Miles clutched the leather notebook in his hand, its worn edges a tangible link to the bizarre events of the night. He looked back at David, who was still sitting at the booth, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. He needed to get David somewhere safe, somewhere far away from this madness. Miles paid the bill, his mind racing. He couldn't take David back to the police station. Explaining any of this would be impossible, and David needed more than just a standard social services placement. He needed someone who understood or, at least believed. He thought of his sister, Sarah. She was a therapist, grounded and practical, but also open-minded. She lived a few hours away, in a quiet town nestled in the mountains. It wasn't ideal, but it was the best option he had. David, Miles said, walking back to the booth. We're going on a little trip. To see my sister. David didn't respond, but he allowed Miles to help him out of the booth. As they walked towards the exit, Miles glanced back at the empty booth where the man in the white shirt had been sitting. He was gone, but his presence lingered, a silent promise of future encounters. They drove through the night, the city lights giving way to the dark, winding roads of the countryside. Miles kept the notebook on the passenger seat, occasionally glancing at the strange symbols and cramped handwriting. He couldn't understand the words, but the drawings of the sigils were clear, intricate, and unsettling. He thought about what the man had said. Not the only one. And the balance is fragile. What did that mean? Were there other entities? Other bindings? And who was this man, who seemed to possess such intimate knowledge of these things? As they drove, David finally spoke. His voice was quiet, hesitant. The shadows, they followed us. Miles's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but saw only the dark road behind them. Where, David? In the car, David whispered. There in the back. Miles's heart hammered against his ribs. He resisted the urge to slam on the brakes and jump out. He had faced down a physical entity in the house, but the idea of invisible, sentient shadows in the confined space of the car was deeply unsettling. Are they doing anything? Miles asked, trying to keep his voice calm. They're just watching, David said. And Diane whispering. Whispering. Miles strained his ears, but heard nothing but the hum of the engine and the wind outside. Were they whispering to David? Or about him? Or about Miles? He drove faster, the urgency to get to his sister's house intensifying. He needed to get David to safety, and he needed to figure out what these shadows were and why they were following them. They arrived at Sarah's house just as the sun was beginning to paint the sky with hues of orange and pink. Sarah, a woman with kind eyes and a calming presence, was understandably surprised to see her brother at her doorstep at this hour, with a silent, traumatized child in tow. Miles gave her the bare minimum of information: a house fire, a rescued child, a difficult situation. He left out the burning symbols, the malevolent entity, the man in the white shirt, and the whispering shadows. He knew he would have to tell her eventually, but not yet. Not until he had a clearer picture of what was happening. Sarah, bless her heart, didn't ask too many questions. She took David in, gave him a warm blanket and a cup of hot chocolate, and settled him on the couch. David still didn't speak much, but he seemed a little more relaxed in the safe, welcoming environment of Sarah's home. While David slept, Miles sat with Sarah, the leather notebook open on the coffee table between them. He finally began to explain, carefully choosing his words, trying to make the unbelievable sound plausible. He told her about the house, the fire, the strange room in the basement. He showed her the notebook. Sarah listened patiently, her expression shifting from concern to disbelief to a kind of wary understanding. She was a therapist. She had seen and heard many things, but Miles knew this was testing the limits of her professional experience. I know, Miles said, and I think the entity might be following us. He hesitated, then decided to tell her about David's claim of the shadows in the car. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't dismiss it. David has been through a severe trauma, she said. But that doesn't mean his perceptions aren't valid, especially given the circumstances. What do we do now? Sarah asked, her voice practical despite the strangeness of the situation. I have to go back, Miles said, his mind already made up. To the house. I have to find that book. Jacob's book. It might have more information. It might be the only way to understand what's happening and how to stop it. Sarah looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. Miles, that house is a crime scene. You're an FBI agent, but you can't just break in. I know, Miles said. But I have to. Whatever is going on, it's not just about a house fire. It's about something ancient, something dangerous. And I have a feeling it's only just beginning. He looked down at the notebook in his hands. The symbols seemed to shimmer in the faint morning light. He had a feeling that the man in the white shirt was right. He had stepped onto a path he may not be able to leave. And the first step on that path was going back to the burned-out shell of Jacob's house, to find a book that held the secrets of an ancient power.